Hello, welcome to our video on the insight process. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is the project management process for providing data analytics and insight to your organisation as we see it. This is based on 15 years of experience managing insight projects across numerous industries and disciplines, and so I hope you find it useful and informative. Before we get started though, just to let you know, I'm not going to be demoing any of the functionality within Brijj today, but it'll be good to keep in mind that the subject matter that I'm talking about is exactly what Brijj aims to improve and help you with. Okay, so let me just reduce my size here and let's get going. So first, let's frame what we mean by insight and the insight process and who matters in the organisation. So in any organisation, frequently someone somewhere has some kind of question that they need an answer in order to enact some kind of positive outcome. Now, these questions can come in many forms, all the way from something very simple, a general need for some kind of information, something like, say, historical sales data to be used to help target in the future, all the way to more complicated kinds of questions or requests, something like, let's say, to deliver a machine learning model which can help predict workloads for delivery teams, things like that. But ultimately though, someone somewhere has a question or a need that needs to be answered so that it can deliver some kind of positive outcome. Now, to move from a question to that outcome, you need some kind of insight. Some kind of insight needs to be generated. And so the sort of team names and business functions who are most often responsible for providing these insights are things like, data teams, reporting, BI, analytics, data science, research, etc. So this is what we mean when we say insight. Basically, it means the data and information, the analysis and outputs provided by those people who specialise in providing organisational information to create some kind of decision, action and outcome. So let's talk now about the two high-level stakeholders who matter most when it comes to insight. So in any insight project, there's two sides to the same coin. Now, we here at Brijj, we term these stakeholders as creators and consumers. So what do we mean by this? Well, creators are those people who build insights and consumers are those who actually use them. So the sort of job titles that you'll know creators to have are things like BI developer, data analyst, data scientist, analytics manager, reporting analyst, visualization specialist. And the sort of job titles that you'll know a consumer to have, well, that can be anyone and everyone, because ultimately all of us at different times need insight in order to do our jobs. So I'm highlighting the creator and consumer relationship here because in our view, it's the absolute essence of a successful insight project. So the two sides of this coin, they depend on each other to start the project in the right way, to build something of value and ultimately deliver that outcome. So let me explain. So a consumer has some kind of question which they often ask of a creator. Now, a creator goes through a process which we'll explain a little bit more later and builds an insight, be that a report, a BI dashboard, an ML model, and they deliver that insight to the consumer who takes it and ultimately should make a decision with it. Okay, there's no point in creating an insight unless a decision is made. And that decision therefore would undoubtedly inform some kind of action. And then that action is actually going to create some kind of outcome. Now the thing about this is, outcomes often end up creating questions. So things don't stop there. As outcomes are achieved, as actions are taken and decisions are made, new insights are created, new questions arise, more decisions, more actions, more outcomes. This happens over and over and over again. And then what happens from here is over time, as an insight function matures, as BI teams develop, as analytics teams produce more and more insight, as you implement more systems to manage relationships between consumers and creators, it builds what I call a body of work, which starts to speed up the provision of insight by leveraging historical insights. You can use past models and data-backed actions to answer new questions, to reduce rework and to deliver faster. So this is why we're so focused on the relationship between the consumers and creators, because it's that relationship, that back and forth, those insights, those actions, those decisions, those outcomes, which create this kind of perpetual motion, of insight and outcomes, so that when they work effectively together, you create this body of work which has huge amounts of value. So, we spoke a lot about the relationship between insight creators and consumers, but let's talk about insight projects themselves. So what do we need when we start an insight project? Now, insight teams of all guises need some kind of mechanism to intake work, to be available to be asked the questions which instigate the insights they create. Now, it's our opinion that the best way to do that is to systemize it through one channel across the whole organization. But the reality is that most teams use email for this, which, while messy, keeps barriers low for data consumers, which is always the right thing to do. But what information should be gathered at the start of a project? Well, the first thing we need to know is what the consumer actually wants at a high level. So some kind of summary. These usually take the form of the data that the person needs, the stat, the report, the snippet of information. But the next thing we should try to ascertain is whether the consumer is looking for a specific result, and we term this as the truth or a proof. I mean, the reality is that sometimes consumers want insight teams to find data which supports a previous hypotheses, and this is completely fine in moderation. But knowing this up front is important because it frames how a given creator will actually evaluate the data. And finally, what you need is you need to know the business decision, action or outcome which is desired. Now, you will hear this spoken about over and over again, the need to link analytics work to a decision, action or outcome. But very few people have the systems in place to actually ascertain what that decision, action or outcome is intended to be and record that in a systemized way. And it's very important, I think, for that to be done. Now, experienced creators know through experience that sometimes what is asked for is not the best insight to actually deliver that desired outcome or decision or action. So having this information up front, it saves so much time and makes for much happier stakeholders. So not only having it up front is important, but recording it up front is important so that once an insight is delivered, you actually know whether you delivered the value that was needed. Now, usually this phase of a project is actually led by the consumer, as it's them who needs to define what we term as the ultimate insight need. Okay, but this high-level summary, this insight need, is all that's required sometimes, but most of the time it's not. That summarized insight need, it has to be broken down and understood at a more granular level so that a defined set of requirements can be created to actually do the technical work in the background. Now, this is where the relationship between creators and consumers becomes even more important and starts to be more so led actually by the creators. And so what do we need to know in order to build out our requirements? We need further clarity on the full scope of the project. We need to understand what types of outputs are needed. Is it a BI dashboard that you would like? Is it a written report, etc., etc.? We need to get further clarity on the actions or decisions that need to be taken. We need to provide more detail on the parameters of the analysis. We need to provide mock-ups and maybe proof of concepts on models and visualizations. We need to know the basics like the delivery timeframes. We need to understand what project success overall looks like. We even sometimes need to understand any privacy considerations for the models or the outputs that we're creating. All of this needs to be discussed and ideally documented in some kind of way, with the collaboration behind it recorded, so that when things change, and they will change, they always do, you can see how the project has developed over time, so you can learn lessons and you can improve. So what happens then is, once requirements are built, the actual work of building insights begins. The analysts, the specialists, the scientists, they go away and they often work with other creators to actually build the insights and outputs that have been agreed. So far, I've spoken as if the relationship between consumers and creators is one of individuals. But, everyone here will know that the reality is that that's rarely the case. There are often multiple stakeholders working on individual insights at one time, using a variety of different tools and techniques, be it things like Snowflake, Python, Nime, Tableau, all those different systems. And at this point, creators and consumers often split up, so to speak. Now, this divide is natural and is actually, in some scenarios, it's actually needed, because consumers don't often need to understand, the detail of how insights are built. They're just interested, actually, in the insight itself. The danger here, though, is that while the actual building of insight is being done, that some kind of divide begins to form, and collaboration between creators and consumers starts to break down. Now, our research actually shows this is very common. For example, the most common complaint from consumers, according to our research, is that they don't know what stage their requests are at. They don't hear back for days and weeks at a time, and they sometimes aren't even sure who exactly is working on their insights at all. Now, this is obviously really bad. It results in dissatisfaction, and it goes against many of the principles of agile development itself. What you need to be sure to do is accept the reality that a bit of a gap will form and is needed to a degree, and have some kind of, metaphorical or literal bridge, which means creators and consumers can connect in an easy but structured way. This way you can iterate, you can review draft outputs, you can agree change to scope, and generally collaborate. But all of this needs to be recorded, documented, so that lessons can be learned. It's even better if you have robust systems in place to make this process automatic and easy for both your creators, so they can have the required structure to actually deliver work, but so that your consumers, if they want, can actually keep informed on what's going on. If they're brave enough to actually look at the detail about what's going on with the creation of their insights, they can do that. But more than often than not, they're okay with the level of collaboration integration they have. So, that's a very high-level description of how an insight is delivered and how consumers and creators work together. But we can see, therefore, that a question is asked, an insight is built, and then it's delivered. Now, as I mentioned before, the reality is, though, that in any organisation there are often multiple consumers across many different teams asking lots of different questions, and that there are also multiple creators across lots of different teams providing insights to answer them. That could be a marketing analyst, that could be a finance analyst across different departments within an organisation. So the insight generation process is happening like this over and over again, constantly. Questions asked, insights delivered. So this can get very messy, very, very quickly, especially if your consumers and creators are working in silos, taking in questions independently, managing projects in their own way, in their own system, delivering outputs directly to different consumers, storing them across multiple platforms and system folders. Now, the problems with this are common, and they're quite obvious actually. Consumers unsure where to find their insights. Creators not knowing where historical work has been stored, meaning they're redoing work that's already been achieved. It can result in low visibility across the organisation of the insights being generated, meaning consumers aren't aware of potentially valuable insights which are being developed in different areas. And creators sometimes working on the same question are not even aware that a relevant question has been asked to the wrong team. One of the obvious problems, it results in low collaboration where, valuable input from domain experts might be missed simply because they don't know an insight even exists. And lastly, all of this together can result in a fundamentally disconnected data culture, and it's disconnected from the very insights that the culture should be built upon. It's sad to see, but so many organisations have a wealth of insight which isn't utilised in the right way, so that its impact is lost over time. So what do we recommend? Well, the obvious solution is to make sure that the delivery of insights is organised in a way where consumers can easily find them, where creators can easily associate questions and need with historical outputs and the requirements and the building blocks which supported the creation of those insights. It seems so obvious, but our research shows lots of organisations have this problem. But worryingly, it's actually that the consumers that know that this problem exists, but creators don't realise it. Creators, they know there is valuable insight in their organisation because they built it. But often consumers don't feel the same way. Now, by making sure that you're delivering insights in a unified way, stakeholders know where they can find them easily. Okay? They have visibility of insights they might not have been directly involved in. Valuable insight from domain experts and other stakeholders can be found because now they have visibility of all of the insight that's going around the organisation. You create a higher level, obviously, of collaboration, and you start to build that connected data culture that every organisation needs and deserves. So, is the process finished once an output is delivered? Now, in our view, not by a long shot. Remember I said earlier that the point of an insight project is to take a question and deliver some kind of positive change. Well, you need to actually record if that insight was of good enough, let's say, quality and had the required utility to deliver that outcome, don't we? You can't simply say, well, I delivered the report. You can't say that anymore. We need to prove our impact as insight teams. But post-project follow-up is probably the aspect of a project that data teams struggle with the most. Because once a project is delivered, there are other questions to answer. There's more insights to deliver. You have 3 months more work to do than to be talking about the last 3 months. This is just a reality of the discipline, and we often see that divide we spoke about earlier starting to creep back in because there simply isn't the time to follow up enough. What you need to try and ensure is that despite the extra workload, that you have some kind of bridge to follow up with your consumers to record and evaluate the decisions that were actually made, the actions that were actually taken and the outcomes that were actually achieved. I mean, how else can you know if you met the initial need if you don't have a way to actually find out? It's with this information over lots of projects across multiple insights that you create and further validate that body of work I mentioned before and provide the evidence which enables you to better deliver the next project, the next insight, and make the impact that you need. So, actually, there we have it. The insight process, according to me and according to Brijj. As I mentioned earlier, I call it some sort of perpetual motion machine of consumers and creators, connected together, asking questions, planning, building, delivering and evaluating outcomes from insights, which over time generate more questions and more value over and over again.